So there are the dwarves happily mining away in the middle of the mountains when a bunch of elves turn up. What happens is the elves kick the dwarves out with the assistance of their two dragons, of course, and the survivors from that battle flee north, and they set up a camp. They set up a little stockade just to the north of the mountains. There they're going to sit down and figure out their next move. However, their ponderings are interrupted by a lookout reporting coming over the horizon orcs. Thousands of them. Yes, today in the Bane Wars, we're looking at the Battle of Orcs Drift. Hi, I'm Rob Point and thanks for joining me today on Dragon's Teeth for this latest update in the Bane Wars campaign. If you've been watching the series, you'll know that there's been a bit of a to-do between the elves and the dwarves, and the elves have effectively expelled the dwarven mining operation from the mountains. Now, there is another dwarven army has been spotted heading up from the south. They've not arrived yet. That's all happening off screen, so to speak. In the meantime, as I said, the survivors of that elven attack have set up a stockade to the north. They're pondering their next move. Now, we then have to throw into the mix the Orc army, which has just appeared from the north. These have been scouting around for a particular artifact, and they have received word by various means that perhaps the dwarves know of its whereabouts, or they may even be in possession of this artifact. Now, the Orcs aren't really one to waste time and waste words. Rather than sending in a team to negotiate or anything else, they can see that they outnumber the dwarves by about 2 to 1. Obviously, it's time to attack first and ask questions later. So that's the battle we're reporting on today. We fought this last Monday down at Bedford Gladiators. Mark is the Orc commander, and as the Dwarven army is an NPC one, I took control of that. And to be honest, it was pretty much a foregone conclusion. The dwarves were outnumbered at least 2 to 1 in terms of points. They did have some defensive advantage, maybe, very slight, but I think no one was in any real doubt as to the outcome of this battle. So, let's see what happened. So here's the Dwarven stockade. Now I had to make do a little bit with some 28mm fences and walls. So it's stockade-ish. And here's our dwarf troops. We've got 6 companies of dwarven miners. There's 2 companies of dwarven guards, 3 companies of crossbows, and a commander and a priest. They've also got a couple of companies of ravens, and the bears in the middle there, that actually represents one very large bear. And there on the horizon appears the Orc army. Well, actually, this is just half of the Orc army, because they're coming on in 2 parts. This first force includes some trolls, there's some wolf riders, they're archers with poison arrows, very effective. And the Orcs have recruited some gargoyles as well. They've got 2 companies of gargoyles. So that's the basic table set up to start. Very simple. We kept it simple because obviously there's not much manoeuvring going on. And the second Orc army is going to be appearing in this corner at some point. The Orc army comes in at around 1100 points, I think, 1200 points. And the dwarves are somewhere around the 500 mark. So, as we said, a considerable size advantage for the Orcs. So the battle gets underway. The dwarves are the red counters. We start activation and the dwarves get the first couple of activations. The priest and the commander are activated. Crossbows are loaded. And then the Orcs start moving forward. The trolls, very slow. Of course, they're the heavy troops. The wolf riders move 5, I think, so they're really quick. And it soon became clear what the Orc tactic was here. Separate units of those wolf riders, one going clockwise, one going counterclockwise. A bit like an old western film, really. Yeah, and this proved to be quite an effective tactic. Turn 2, the wolf riders continue their pincer movement, keeping out of crossbow range. They're a bit nervous about those crossbows. The trolls are moving forward, also just staying out of crossbow range. And I think really their idea was really just to pin the crossbows down, just to keep them in place. Because obviously the trolls are really heavy. No one wants them breaking into the stockade. And there's the other wolf riders going round to the other side. Really at this stage, well, to be honest, for most of the battles, the dwarves can't do much but sit and watch as all of this unfolds. Oh, if those ravens look a bit like bats, that's because they are. They're my vampire bats standing in as ravens. And at the end of this turn, the Orcs made a roll to see if their other army turned up. Basically, they needed a 1 for the first turn, then 2 next time, then 1, 2 or 3, and so on and so on. So now the wolf riders start coming in, and it's typical tactics: come in, fire, dodge back out again. And of course, as mounted archers, they have a much better field of fire than the dwarves. And the trolls move up a bit closer. They're still staying out of crossbow range, but they're still there threatening. So it's a difficult decision for the dwarves to shift the crossbows round or keep an eye on those trolls. And that gets us into our first lot of shooting. We're at long range, and we're counting the stockade as a light fortification from the Fantastic Battles rules. It's not really quite a palisade, but it is made by dwarves, so you know it's going to be strong and sturdy. That also ups the defence value of the troops behind it to 5. But as I mentioned before, these wolf riders have poison arrows, so any 6s they roll, they get to roll again. It's like an exploding dice. So, these prove to be very effective archers. And in fact, that first volley took 6 off of the resolve of the Dwarven miners there, which I think is about 1/3 of their total. So that's very effective for a first volley, given that the dwarves are behind a stockade as well. Then it was the turn of the wolf archers on the other side of the stockade, again firing at long range, and these did slightly less better. They only got 3 hits, so that's just 3 to take off the resolve of the other unit of dwarven miners in the corner there. And then the dwarves get first activation this turn, but what do? What do they move? They could potentially charge at the wolf riders, though if we take a little bit off for them coming over the stockade, it's doubtful they'll even reach. And of course, those wolf riders being mounted are just going to skip back out of charge range. So the dwarf army has very limited options here. Their main strength is the crossbows. They haven't got enough of them to cover every side. So really it's just sit and wait, and, you know, waiting for the Orc army to come in to storm the walls and then try and engage them in hand-to-hand. The Dwarf commander decides to pull the miners back a bit, hopefully to get them out of bow range, though this didn't really achieve very much, as we'll see. There's a bit of movement on the other side. The other unit of miners decides to come up against the fence to face the wolf riders there. And the dwarf priest as well is going to move forward. He's hoping to get within spell range because he has a nice thunderbolt to cast. This is one of those tweaks I mentioned to the magic rules that we did. We've given the individual mages of each armies slightly different spells that sort of reflects the character of the army. Oh, and the Orc commander made a successful reinforcement roll at the end of last turn as well. So now the second half of the Orc army is deployed on the table. And yes, it's more wolf riders. Lots of them. Things are looking really bad for the dwarves now. And so, of course, the wolf riders on this side just come up to the stockade now and start firing over it into the hapless miners. And there's pretty much the same happening on the other side as well. The other unit of wolf riders, they're sort of charging parallel to the wall, firing in as they go. The other thing we did here was we designated that section of wall in the fence there as the gate. And the gargoyles were given the job of charging the gate. They couldn't quite make it there this time, but basically next round they're going to move on to the gate and start battering it, trying to open it. Back into firing then, and fortunately for the miners on the left here, we got a very poor dice roll. So they took no hits from those wolf archers up against the fence. On the other side, however, the ravens took a couple of hits. They're on the move, as you might notice. So now the rest of the Orc army starts making its move, and we've got chariots here. Chariots and wolf riders. So quite a heavy force. This is a nice, strong, mobile force. It's almost a bit like sort of Genghis Khan type army. Very mobile and quite hard hitting. Ah, the dwarf priest is in range for the thunderbolt. He goes for it. He needs a 4, 5 or a 6. He rolled a 1. I think that's the point that the dwarves knew that they were doomed. The wolf riders, meanwhile, continue their circulation. And the gargoyles are now banging on the gates. The dwarf crossbows get fed up with waiting around. They will 90 degrees. And they're going to see if they can get some shots in at the advancing chariots or riders. Of course, with the crossbows moving, that emboldens the trolls to move up. You know, that's going to be a big hit if they get into combat range. Meanwhile, here they come, the rest of them, the wolf riders. And some regular infantry there as well. And the ravens now decide to make a charge. They're going to attack the wolf riders. They know it's a suicide job, but, you know, they figure perhaps they can keep these archers busy for a bit. And actually, they made a good dice roll. They scored 5 hits. Unfortunately, they took 4, which wiped them out, so the ravens are gone. But at least we got some satisfaction of giving the archers 5 hits out of, I think it's a total of 16 for that unit. And the wolf riders on this side, they make up for their earlier dismal roll with a much better score this time. So much so that they wipe the dwarven miners out. They're gone. So that basically just leaves the crossbows on this side at this point. We managed to get a bit of a sneaky shot in on the wolf riders. And they score a few hits. I think it's 3 points of damage or 3 resolve, which isn't really going to have any effect. The bear moves towards the gate. That's the point being attacked at the moment. Knocking buildings aside as he goes. He is a very big bear. And the mage goes for another thunderbolt against the gargoyles. Again, he needs a 4 on a d6. And what does he roll? Another bloody 1. Can you believe it? And here come the trolls. They are slow moving, but next turn they're going to be over that fence. And there we go, we've got the wolf riders crossing each other now. We've got the chariots and other wolf riders moving up with just those crossbows there. And the miners on this side have had enough. They're jumping over the stockade and they're charging the gargoyles. But of course the gargoyles are flying creatures, so they're easily able to avoid the charge. But it does save the gate from a battering. We get an exchange of missile fire from the chariots here and the crossbows. Oh, and also the... actually, they're not wolf riders, they're boar riders. What a bore. Little bit of damage done each side. Again, nothing too bad. But now, of course, we've got the full charges going in. Now, we had a bit of a discussion about charges with the stockade. What we decided on, I'm not sure if it's right or not according to the rules, is we wouldn't give the charge bonus as there is a stockade in the way. Talking of charges, the miners try and charge the gargoyles again, who of course just move out the way. So they can't make contact, but it does at least keep them clear of the gate. And here come the trolls now. So the dwarves really in trouble now. And we've still got all these orc forces moving up. So we get the melee over the stockade here. And the dwarves acquit themselves quite well, but of course outnumbered as they are, they're wiped out. Which basically just leaves those 2 units of guards on this side and the commander. We've got the bear who's moving towards the trolls, and on this other side we've got the priest, the useless priest, and those miners. We've still got the wolf riders riding round, firing willy-nilly at anything they can see. So it's obviously hopeless for the dwarves now. And they ask for terms of surrender. And this is where everyone was surprised, because the Orc commander decided, yeah, you can surrender, and as long as you leave your wagons here with all their loot in and supplies, we'll just let you go. So the Dwarves gratefully accepted that, and with heads held high they marched out of the stockade and off into the distance. There we go then. In terms of the actual fight, it was a resounding success for the Orcs. They took very few casualties, and the Dwarves were losing companies by the turn, really. It was obvious they would only last another few turns before they'd be totally wiped out. So the Dwarves gladly accepted the Orcs' terms of surrender, and I think everyone was a bit surprised, including the onlookers, that the Orcs then just let the Dwarves go. They sort of said, okay, off you go then. Obviously all the Dwarven wagons and all their plunder and treasure is there, but the whole remainder of that Dwarf force was just allowed to leave. It's going to be interesting to see in terms of the campaign if that has any repercussions later on, either for the Orc commander or perhaps for other forces who are operating in that area as well. And one thing that this battle has started is now we have 2 or 3 of the main forces in quite close proximity. So we're starting to get a lot more face-to-face diplomacy going on. Obviously we had the espionage aspect that I talked about last time, but now we've got actual priests and wizards and commanders meeting face-to-face to talk. And it's very interesting to see the negotiations, of course. And this is one of the great things about the campaign to me, this input from the players, as I've said before, which really helps me to build the narrative. Because at the start, I have some ideas about how things are going to go, but you never know how commanders are going to react. Sometimes they react in a most unpredictable way, but that really then spurs me to think up, right, well, if they do that, then this might affect that over here. So you can start weaving all these threads together. So it seems the Orcs have yet to find their artifact. Do the Dwarves have it? Do the Elves have it? No one's quite sure. There are some other players coming into the picture now, but I'm not going to go into any more detail at that. Perhaps they will pop up in the next battle. Who knows? Stay tuned to find out. Big thanks to everyone who has subscribed so far, and also a big thanks to everyone who sent in suggestions and questions. Oh, Deep Red did say thanks for explaining the espionage and scouting last time. You're welcome. And they also said, this is really interesting. It sounds like something out of a novel. So there's the seed of an idea being planted there. Maybe this campaign will make the good basis for a novel, or maybe even a series of novellas. We shall see about that. Anyway, thanks again for watching. If you haven't already, please do like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next battlefield.